right, welcome back to another episode of Paw Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dikis. Tonight, I'm joined by Dr. Adam Perler. Thanks for hopping on with me tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited to be here.
So you and I go way back. You used to be an attending at the Indianapolis, it's now called the Ascension St. Vincent program, but you were an attending back then, and little did we know that I scrubbed one of your cases when I was a student, and we would circle back on different paths later down the road. But it's weird how things come full circle. How you doing tonight?
Good. Yeah, almost. Yeah, we're actually over 20 years later.
Yeah, I don't like to think about that.
Now, and we both have a little bit more gray.
Mm-hmm. Yep, day by day.
Yeah, this profession will do that to you.
Absolutely. So you're down in Florida, and you moved from Indianapolis down to Florida. You got tired of the winters up north, or what?
You know the saying, "Happy wife, happy life."
Mm-hmm.
So I met my wife when I was in residency, and I found out you can take a girl out of Florida, but you can't get Florida out of the girl. So we did 13 years up in Indy, and it was a great place to raise a family. And my family was up there and everything, but the winters were kind of tough. And pretty much every weekend during the winter, you're deciding if you're going to go to the museum, go to a movie, and just trying to stay warm. And then I had an opportunity to come down to Florida, and I know my wife was wanting to get back here because her family's down here, and the group fit seemed like a good group fit for me. So we moved about 10 years ago, and we've been thawing out ever since. And now I go back north, and I realize like how cold I used to be.
Yeah.
I think they say that your blood thins out in Florida, and I can really attest to that because I'm a big cold wimp. I get cold in air conditioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, when us Northerners go to Florida and it's 65, we're in shorts, but everyone there is all bundled up because they think it's freezing.
Well, I mean, part of it is because we have like stacks of clothes up in our closet that we can't wear only like a few times a year. But yeah, no, it's been good, and the family life down here has been good because pretty much every weekend there's festivals and things going on. Aside from when we're dodging hurricanes.
Yeah, you got to look out for those.
You got to.
What's your protocol? Do you hunker down or do you get in your car and start driving north?
So that's difficult because the office I used to be at, they would literally stay open until the day before, almost like a public service. But
sure,
a lot of the patients were like, "Why are you still here? Aren't you guys evacuated?"
Yeah.
So we would stay, and just kind of hunker down. We are in typically one of the first zones that gets evacuated, but our house sits up on some elevation.
Where are you at?
So we're in St. Pete, kind of an
Right.
island on an island on an island, or a peninsula on a peninsula on a peninsula. So we're surrounded by water.
Okay.
We're not on the water, but everybody around us is.
Yeah.
But I think no matter where you go, there's always a threat of something.
We're dodging tornadoes here in Iowa, so.
Yeah, actually, we just had a really bad tornado last week.
Don't mess around with Mother Nature. She don't play.
No, she don't play at all.
So you and I have kind of circled back on similar paths now with a company called TriMed. And so we'll kind of spin that off into a whole discussion about product design and development and all that stuff. But let's go backwards a little bit. So you went to Shoal College in Chicago, and then residency in Florida, and then back to Indiana. So you kind of been all over, but take us through your journey and how you got involved in podiatry originally.
Oh, it's funny because I used to do this lecture. I still do it. It's kind of like what I learned. And, it started out 10 years of practice, then it was 15. Now it's, 25 years. But, I remember that question in podiatry school. People would say, "Oh, why did you choose podiatry?" And I would have probably like a 5-minute response of how I got into podiatry. And what I've really kind of come to understand is that sometimes professions choose you. And I had tried to get into med school. I really, really thought I was going to be a pediatric orthopedic specialist. And I also spent a lot of time. There was a mentor of mine who was a cardiologist. And he was actually chief medical officer at one of the big hospitals in Indy, which is now IU Health. And I used to go with him to this homeless healthcare mission. And we went one night and there was like 25 patients signed up. And he looked at the list and like, oh my gosh, we're pretty busy tonight. And he's like, well, we give out free socks. So pretty much everybody signs up and says they have a heart condition to get a free pair of socks.
Mm,
But in reality, there's probably like only one or two people that actually have heart issues.
yeah.
And then he made a statement that really kind of stuck with me. And he said, um, what we really need is we need some feet people to come down here and volunteer, because if these people lose their feet, they lose everything. And I never really thought about the feet as being like a vital organ. I
Sure.
just thought it is something that you didn't want to even deal with.
Yeah.
And that just kind of really lasted with me. There was a book I came across called Duct Tape Marketing, and it talks about this guy on an airplane who was being questioned about what he does. And there's two ways to answer what we do. We could say, "Oh, I'm a podiatrist," right? And maybe you'll get a follow up question, but most of the time you won't. They'll be like, "Oh, interesting,"
Hmm.
and then they'll move on.
Yeah.
Or the other way is to answer it in a way that's intriguing, so they want to ask more. So my thing became, um, I keep people on their feet for a living. That was, I wanted to keep people going, engaged in their life, and if they were having problems with that, that's where I could, hopefully intervene in a positive way and get them back to um, their life. And we know this in patient care. A lot of times when you get these chronic pain patients, they come in and there's the husband, there's the wife, and then there's the pain. And it's like a third member of that marriage that is definitely
Mm,
not welcome.
yeah.
And usually one of them is going to end up going. We just can't always control which one's going to go. But the other person always feels so helpless because they can't help the person that's suffering.
Right.
So that was a big motivation of mine, is to really kind of get to the ground level of why people were not able to enjoy their life if their feet were holding them back, and find a way to help them get back to that. And
That's a fantastic way to think about that, and I completely agree with you. I talk about that with my wife sometimes. For those listening, she's also a podiatrist, and we say that it seems like everyone that comes in to see me has a complaint. And I think, where are all the people who I've helped? And the answer is, they're not in your office. They're out living their life. And I think, could they just swing by the office and just stick their head in for a second and
yeah,
say, hey, just want to let you know I'm doing great? Because the only
positive
people that keep
affirmation.
coming back are the people that you haven't fixed yet.
And they also tend to be the ones that leave bad reviews. And
Right.
um,
But I just
but
want the
yeah,
good people to swing back every now and then and just stick your head in and tell me, hey, I'm doing great. I want to say thanks.
yeah, and you and I have talked about this. I stepped away, stepped back a little bit this year to focus on product development,
Hmm.
and so I got out of the hectic daily office life. And it's amazing how I still get emails every now and then, just people checking in, seeing how I'm doing, and just giving me updates on how they're doing, and it makes you feel really good. I've continued to stay involved in mission work, and I go down to Peru, and I'm actually in the process of packing for the up and coming mission trip.
Hmm.
And what's amazing is there, people will travel 8 hours to see you. They're on a donkey, they're hiking, 4 hours, sometimes, 10 hours out of the mountains.
Yeah.
And then they come and everybody shows up at 8 o'clock in the morning when we do clinic there. And some of them wait till like 5 or 6, and they don't say anything. And then when they come to see you, it's like, they're just so appreciative that you've taken time out of your life to come and try to help them.
Hmm.
And, people, I mean, I had one fight operate on this little girl who had polydactyly, and this father literally carried, it was probably like a 15-pound watermelon out of the mountains through that like 8 hours of travel just to give me a watermelon because I was their form of payment. And
Wow.
you know, it was actually one of the best watermelons I've had. And I can't tell you if it was just because of the story behind it, but then you come back to US healthcare and it's like everybody's mad.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's gotten worse since COVID. Just feel like the temperament of patients, uh, people have just such high expectations at times, and and it's sometimes really hard to meet those expectations.
I think when he brought you the watermelon, you should have said, I'm more of a banana guy.
I do like bananas, but watermelon is really good. But yeah, no, bananas would be a lot easier to
Yeah,
transport.
right, exactly.
Um,
Can you go back and bring back some bananas, please?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and it's funny because not too long ago, my wife bought grapes from like Sam's Club or something, and the packaging said from Piura, Peru, which is one of the places that we travel through to get to where the mission is.
so as you're going through your career
Yep.
and you're involved in patient care and surgery and call and teaching residents and having students like me back in the day, at what point did you start to really become involved or interested in product design and development? Was it born out of, hey, I think there's a better way to do this, or is it just always a passion of yours kind of inventing, or how did that come to be?
I think it's always been a passion. Like I remember when I was in 8th grade, we had to do a project and I chose animation. I don't know why. I wanted to learn about animation, so I learned how to like draw frame by frame and I put a book together and anyhow, it was like this big project and I remember the teacher saying, "You're very different. Like the way you think is very different." And I think I've always been that way. Like
Does she
I
mean
don't
that as
find
a
it
compliment or an
I
insult?
um
You're a little
I don't
different.
know. But I've just always kind of been rigged a little bit different mentally. I just
Yeah,
am an outside the box thinker, and um, I think there's like a creative part of me that just is always trying to find a way to break out, whether it's how I think about surgery or interpersonal relationships, or being spontaneous. How I propose to my wife. I mean, that's a whole nother story. But I've just
that's
always
a different
been
podcast.
a different podcast, yeah. And so, I had actually, I've been involved in fellowship education my whole career. So when I came out of residency, my residency in Miami was actually supposed to go to Hadassah Medical Center for a 6-month fellowship. And right before I went, September 11th happened,
Mm,
and basically the fellowship got canceled. And I was really heartbroken about it. So I knew I was gonna more than likely go to this group in Indianapolis, the American Health Network, which is that where that fellowship was.
mhm.
And I called them and said, "Hey, I'm arriving a year early, but I'm coming with funding. So what if I spent the first like half of my year basically wandering around training with you guys, learning from you, and you wouldn't have to pay me because I have the fellowship dollars." And that ended up being the birth of that fellowship. And then, of course, when I moved down here, I started a fellowship. So that's always been part of me. But anyhow, when I went to Germany for my AO fellowship, the German people, they're very nice, but they don't like to talk,
Mm,
especially English. And they were so far more advanced than we are. I mean, they were integrating intraoperative navigation. They had an intraoperative CT scan that they would do on every single ankle fracture,
hmm.
every single calc fracture to check position of screws. But after hours, like I would try to go into town and talk to people, and nobody would talk to me. So I was like, well, what else am I going to do? So I had my residency was involved in the Vical Pappas, which was one of the original ankle implants, and I was really fascinated with how ankles worked.
Mhm.
So I started studying Inman's axis because I thought, when Inman did his original study over 100 years ago, he pinned the subtalar joint and then he took the ankle through motion and said, "Oh, look, there's a cone of motion that faces medial." So all the implants were designed off of that thought process that there's this kind of internal pivot arc of the ankle, and nobody had ever challenged it. And so I started thinking about the ankle. I'm like, well, what happens when you pronate and supinate? And then if you watch everybody walk, everybody has their unique way to walk. And we're putting an artificial joint in there that's going to dictate how they walk,
Mhm.
because the mechanics are going to be different than your natural ankle. So I started researching a bunch of ankle joint designs and started to think that maybe you should have a design that adjusts to the patient's natural gait, and has an extra degree of frontal plane motion, which none of them really handle that well. All the mobile bearings, if you got them off parallel, they would edge load, and if they edge load, then that would break the poly down, and then you get lysing, swelling, lysing of the bone, and then eventually loosening. When I got back to the U.S., I had this idea for a new ankle implant, and I didn't really know what to do with it because we're not really taught how to do that in school.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my first real innovation. And in that implant, in that design took me to a lot of places, and some really good places and some not so good places, as an innovator, but really kind of helped start my innovative journey, I guess, as a surgeon innovator. And then it was a balance over time. Is this worth anything? Would other people think it's as cool as I think it is?
Yeah.
So I sat on it for a while, and then I want to say it was around 2008, 2009, the market crashed, and uh, nobody knew where to put their money. And I was talking to my wife because we were just starting to get enough of a paycheck that it wasn't all just going to student loans. So she said, "Well, let's not invest in the market." And I was like, "Well, what should we invest in?" She's like, "Well, why don't we invest in one of your ideas?" I'm like, uh, "Okay." So, so yeah, it's that was kind of the beginning, and like I said, that was a pretty bumpy ride for me because I ended up at some point meeting. I went up to Purdue University, which is one of the best biomechanical engineering schools in the country. Took the design up there, sat down with a couple engineers to say, "Hey, this is what I think this is doing. I'm not an engineer, so I do you think I'm achieving this properly?" And they're like, "Oh, this is different. It's really interesting the way you've figured this out." It was basically a multi-axis bearing system that allowed basically frontal plane, so the foot could yaw and pitch, and as it yaw and pitches, the bearing self-adjusts, but it never edge loads.
Hmm.
So, the first piece of advice was you should get a patent. So I went and did the patent thing, and my big mistake was I tried to save money, so I went with, like, a small little patent firm guy instead of going with a true IP firm,
Hmm.
and, wrote the patent, thought I had everything. Actually, I think I wrote it myself, and then I brought it to him, and then he edited it, and then I started to go out and show companies, and it's a daunting task when you have an idea as a physician. You don't always know where to start with it.
Yes.
So um so I got to talk to a lot of different companies, and some of them were very honest and open about where they were with their thought towards the ankle market versus where the industry's at. And some of them were different. They would say, "Oh, we're not really interested." And then there was one company in particular that actually did show interest, and I basically gave all my files to. I was under NDA, I had a patent, and interestingly enough, they gave it back to me after about 7 or 8 months and said that they were going to go in a different direction. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, somebody who knew my ankle device called and said, "Hey, are you part of this new ankle?" And I was like, "No, why?" And they're like, "Oh, well, we saw that it looks a lot like your design." So, and it turns out it was the company that I had talked to. So that was actually, like I said, that ankle took me a lot of places,
Yeah.
and some not so good places, because I learned quickly that industry doesn't always have your best interest in mind as a
Right.
surgeon.
So they essentially stole your idea.
Um, they So it's funny because then I was like, "Oh my gosh, well, I have patents, so let's look into this." So I found a new patent attorney who was way more thorough than the original one,
Hmm.
and he basically just said, what they did was wrong, from an ethical viewpoint, but as far
Hmm.
as a legal viewpoint, um, they were able to go through the language of your patent, find the outs of it, the shortcomings, and then design around it. So basically, it's called reverse engineering.
Hmm.
So I really had no um, recourse, which was kind of a gut punch, especially because at that point, when you sit on 3 patents for 10 years, you're paying a lot of fees. And
Hmm.
so that was basically, at that point, about as much money as we put into our house in Indianapolis. And that was a pretty low point for me because I'm like, my wife wanted to invest in one of my crazy ideas, and
Yeah.
not only has it not gone anywhere, but it's become a liability in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, but then there was the good parts. Like I showed it to Zimmer Biomet. Well, at the time it was Biomet, and they really liked the concept. They liked the way I thought, and so next thing you know, I found myself on their ankle development team, and worked with some really really great DPMs and MDs. And actually, at that time, it was the first ankle project where they had equal representation between DPM surgeons and orthopedic surgeons, because before that, basically the industry approach to product development were the orthos would develop and then they would go to podiatry to put all the implants in. We weren't really utilized that heavily in terms of product design and development. So it was a big honor to be on that initial team with some pretty big names in orthopedics. And I can tell you that when we first started, I don't think they really thought much of podiatry. And it was myself and Jerry Stack. And by the time we were done, I think they all had a deep appreciation for what we knew, because actually I think Jerry and I were the heavy hitters on
Mhm.
that in terms of design influence.
Yeah.
And then Biomet got bought by Zimmer, and then that project got sidelined. And then eventually they terminated the project because they just picked up Paragon, so they
Sure.
have another project. But that's how the industry is, and things kind of ebb and flow. And but that journey was really good for me because I started to really figure out the innovative process and the do's and the don'ts, and I feel like I've gotten pretty decent at it. And then, actually started a company about 10 years ago to team up with surgeons that have ideas and try to help them. And we've been pretty small and for the most part, pretty silent. We've just picked up a few projects here and there, but that's ultimately how I got involved in TriMed as a designer.
Mhm.
And then TriMed, it was myself and Sebastian and a couple other doctors. And that was also another project where they had two DPMs and two MDs together designing. But that's where I got to know Sebastian, and uh, we came up with this really cool concept. And of course, right when that was getting ready to launch, COVID hit.
Yeah.
So we didn't get like the big grand introduction of that system, but it's a really, really clever system. And um, it's a pretty cool.
Yeah. I
Uh,
use it. Yeah.
yeah,
So
it's got some
asset
the
asset
asset.
is the first letter of each of your names who designed it. So ASET,
Yep,
TriMed Asset Plate
yep.
System is I love it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a cool set. And then that really got me into that world. And then as we were doing that, you have a company out there like Treese, which was new at the time. They were the first company that was introducing this concept of, okay, before Treese, it was always about, here's our greatest and latest plate technology, or here's my new screw project. It was always about the hardware, but the technique was 100% up to the surgeon. And so we would all wing it, literally. But the thing is no company had really focused on technique. And then Trees came along and they standardized a technique that pretty much could help anybody if you follow all the steps. And there's a lot of steps, but
Huh.
if you follow the steps, you can pull off a really good lapidus. Well positioned. They were the first ones to really jump on the whole frontal plane. I remember Larry DiDomenico talking about it. I want to say back in 2012.
Mhm.
And then Trees came out and found a way to make a procedure out of it. And they were the first to do that. So I remember TriMed, having some really, really cool Lapidus plates and, but saying, how are people going to not, come to your booth over this other booth?
Mhm.
What's going to drive them to your booth because you have something different? It really comes down to technique. So that's when I really started thinking about, you know, what what if there was something that could level all of our skills? Like I said, we all train differently.
Mhm.
And how do you know that the person that's treating you is the best at that particular technique? I mean, there are Indianapolis, we had really big name ortho guys that had Harvard on their training certificate and everything. Um, but it didn't mean that they were great at every single thing they did, but a lot of people interpreted it that way.
Sure.
So how do you know that the person that you're going to is the best for that particular technique or whatever? So how do we move beyond that to get to a point where everybody gets good outcomes pretty much all the time, regardless of their training level? 1 year out of residency versus 30 years out in practice. And that really became, in my mind, PSI, which is the patient-specific instrumentation or customization or personalization of surgery.
Yeah.
And I remember we started to work on some sort of positioning guide specific for that project because I'm like, TriMed really needs to have something like that to help them promote their awesome plating system. They need a technique to go with it. So what if you could CT scan, plan everything, print your own guides, and then when you go to the OR, all you have to do is slap the guide on, cut. You don't even have to measure a thing. And if you take 10 people who have 10 very different training, but you show them how to mount a guide, they theoretically should all get the same exact outcome.
Hmm.
Wouldn't that be good for the patients? Because now you have a skills leveler.
I want to go back for a second. So
Yeah,
the patent that you had with the attorney that wasn't fantastic, what was it? Was there something that could have been done on the original patent to protect yourself
yeah,
from what had happened?
yeah. So I told you I created a mobile bearing system that was polyaxial and had multiple components. And I didn't really know where the market was because at the time there was the Star, there was the Beagle Pappas. They were two mobile bearings and they were going through the FDA. And then you had the N-Bone, which had just come out and it was fixed bearing. And then you have the Agility, and the Agility was like a dinosaur in the market. And so nobody knew if the next company come out with the total ankle was going to go mobile bearing because all the European designs, like 90% of them were mobile. And it really comes down to economics. Um, when you look at what it cost to bring the Star to the market through the FDA, because it was a class 3 design, meaning they couldn't use any other system out there as predicate. They had to prove all their science.
Yeah.
It cost them close to $40 million to bring it through the FDA over a 10-year period.
Huh.
Versus if you have an ankle that's fixed bearing,
Yeah.
as long as you can to the FDA show how you're equivalent to something that's already on the market, but then in your marketing show how you're different,
Right.
then you have a winning device. So I had to think of a way to make it a fixed bearing. So eventually I thought, okay, well, what if I had a modular system where you can switch the bearing? In Europe, you could put in a mobile bearing. In the US, you could put in a fixed bearing. But at any point, you could interchange the bearings because you can actually test it out on the table and have these interchangeable bearings. So that's what I ended up designing. It was actually very different, very cool. Nobody had something like that. So I went back to that attorney and said, okay, I have this new vision of this. And so we wrote a new patent, and that one I was not involved in. So he wrote
Mhm.
that out, and I could have understood patenting a little bit better than I did. And I think that was, in a way, a mistake I made because I trusted that the attorney was doing the right thing. So it came down to a language. So I said that the way the language read was this is a polyaxial mobile bearing ankle implant that can be converted to a fixed bearing.
Mhm.
What it what it should have said is it could be a mobile bearing or it could be a fixed bearing. Instead, it was an and. It's a mobile bearing and it can be converted to a fixed bearing. So the loophole was, well, if we just come out with an ankle that's fixed bearing and we're not a modular system and you can't switch it out, we're okay. And they found that loophole. So that was the expensive lesson that I learned is that when you think you're saving money up front by going to a lesser expensive attorney,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to protecting concepts and ideas, it's much better to spend the money up front because it's going to cost you in the long run when you make a mistake like that. And
Yeah.
it cost me. I mean, I have the ankle device that's actually sitting in my closet back there, and I've thought about at some point dusting it off and trying to bring it to market myself, but I've just gotten busy with other stuff. But I still believe in the design.
So, do you feel comfortable sharing how much money you have sunk into that?
Um, when you first start uh, patents, it might be 500 or 600 bucks if you write your own provisional per patent. When you go to convert to a utility patent, which is a full patent that you have to do within a year of filing for your provisional, it's usually about 3 to 4 thousand, and that's just basic
Mhm.
fees. If you have a well-written patent and you're paying an attorney to really comb through everything, then you're looking at close to 7 or 8,000 for that initial write-up. Then once your patent gets an office action, you also have to decide if you're going to protect internationally. You
Hmm.
have to start picking the countries, and then each country has their own fee. So I was really, really focused on bringing this to market. So I did that times three because each patent stood on its own.
Hmm.
And, but I can tell you that the hard cost on the actual patent was around 350,000 over that. And it was gut wrenching to think about it. That money was flushed away, but at the same time, that was an education that was extremely valuable to me, and I think it's become valuable to others as I've kind of coached them through the process and helped them avoid making some of the mistakes I made as a young innovator.
So I want to spin that negative of sunk cost and time and energy and effort into the success that you have had recently. So you're talking about Redpoint, the company that you started with patient specific instrumentation. And would you like to tell everyone how that kind of progressed and where it is today?
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of mentioned earlier that we were thinking about technique and what can you do to improve. Um, I guess the goal of Redpoint was actually to not just improve one surgery, it was to improve all surgeries.
Hmm.
And it was really ambitious. When we first started, we started with the idea of this Lapidus, right? And it was myself. I mean, we were literally a garage startup. Like this engineer that I worked with, he bought a 3D printer, he stuck it in his garage, and he's like, "Hey, send me a CT scan and let's model this up and talk about the surgery." I'm like, "Okay." So we did that. He taught himself through a program called Slicer. Slicer basically, so when you get a CT scan, the raw data is called a DICOM. It's a
Hmm.
DICOM file, and it's just like an X-ray. When you fly through a CT scan slice by slice, you're just looking at 2D images.
Yeah.
Well, if you take all those images and put them together in a block of data, is now a 3D model, but you can't do anything other than rotate that model around in space, right? So Slicer, what it does is allows you to define each bone independently. You can draw on each bone and say, this is the navicular bone, and then you subtract that out. And then this is the cuneiform, you subtract that out. What it allows you to do is now control the whole skeleton bone by bone. So now you can start to manipulate relationships between bones. So when James started that, he taught himself how to do it. It would take him about 8 hours to segment. So you get the DICOM, you convert it to an STL, which is a 3D file, and then you segment it. And there was a couple companies that were just coming out. This was before COVID. A couple companies that were just coming out with auto segmentation, meaning they could have AI pick out the bones and then separate it out. So that was the very first one. And then we got on CAD CAM, on a webinar or whatever, and he said, "Where do you want to put your first metatarsal?" I'm like, "Okay, well, ideally, you want it to be relatively parallel to the second." And then we talked about the sesamoids, and I'm like, "I want to rotate the metatarsal." So then we start thinking, well, how can you rotate? You know, well, we can segment the bone and look at it almost like a clock face and see that we want the crista to sit at 6 o'clock,
Hmm.
and if it's rolled, we can calculate the difference between where it is now and where we want it to be. So we came up with a method to rotate the bone through the cut guide using pin transfer technique. So we were just thinking about that. And then as we were going through that process, um, I was like, this could work for metaductus. This could work for, an ankle deformity. I mean, some of the hardest, for me at least, some of the hardest ankle deformities were, the varus and valgus and
Hmm.
setting the ankle, not just in the frontal plane, but also in the dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, so you don't create a recurvatum or procurvatum.
Hmm.
Um, those are technically hard surgeries, even if you do them all the time, you know? So we started to think how this PSI approach could be applied to any surgery that has a deformity, because the power of 3D printing is that you have to go through a planning phase. And when you go through a planning phase, you're seeing the foot in a way that you've never seen it before. So when we first started, I actually had booked a Treese case, and I didn't tell the Treese rep that I what I was doing. Um, but James sent me a cut guide, and the patient knew. I told him I was going to do it, and that is interesting. That first conversation when you have with someone, and they say, "Well, how many of these have you done?" And you say, "Well, not only I've never done one, but I don't think one's ever been done. So
Yeah.
you're going to be the first."
Yeah.
But the cool thing was the amount of bone that we were resecting through that guide was less than the standard Lapiplasty. So we were pretty confident that if worse comes to worse, I could bail on it and just default to the Lapiplasty technique.
Yeah.
So the very first case I did, I walked in, I opened up the foot, exposed the joint, didn't do anything to prep it, just put the guide on, made the cut. And like within 35 minutes, I was closing, and the rep is like, "That's like the fastest Lapiplasty I've ever seen."
Hmm.
And I didn't really bring a lot of attention to what I was doing. I think they knew, because they saw me not use some of their stuff.
Hmm.
But, I walked out of the OR, and of course, my phone was being blown up by James because he's like, "Dude, how did it go? Like, did everything go?" He was like he was probably more nervous about it than I was, because I
Yeah.
knew I had a fallback, but,
Right.
he designed this thing and it took us weeks to figure it out. And I called him like, seriously, that was one of the least stressful surgeries I've ever done. Like, literally, like I didn't have to think about anything. So that was the epiphany I had coming out of that first surgery. Was I just experienced a surgery where intraoperative navigation was taken care of, and so there was this relief by doing that. And so we started to think out how we could do this process for the rest of the body. And being that this was a primarily DPM project, started by myself and then this engineer. So that's how we built the company. And it was super exciting. And every, I had a double life. Like, I was my normal practice, I was a fellowship director, I was a dad. And then at 5 o'clock, I'd shut that process off. I'd put on, just like you have your Pod Patrol hat on. I'd put my
Hmm.
Red Point medical hat on, hop on meetings at night, hop on meetings on weekends, and did this startup. And it was literally a garage startup. And within a year, we were the first company to get FDA approved for PSI uh, approach to all foot and ankle deformities all the way down to the age of 12. Pretty early on in our game, we were only in the market for about 9 months. I made it to one AOFAS meeting and one ACFAS meeting as a vendor, and then we got acquired, actually by Trees. So it kind of came full circle that was the very first PSI case I did. Was
Hmm.
instead of using a Trees cut guide, um, and that's where the technology ended up going. And they're in the process of incorporating it into their Lapiplasty and abductoplasty systems, and I think they're going to do a really good job with it. I was invited to write a textbook chapter on the use of 3D printing in Charcot patients,
Hmm.
and I think it has tremendous potential, especially on the virtual planning side. Um, and Redpoint had a solution for that. So I'm sad to see that technology is not currently available, but I have hope that one day it will be unleashed somehow.
I think that's interesting because Charcot, the quote unquote original anatomy, is gone. It's that
100%.
patient specific anatomy. No one else in the world has that specific anatomy. You can do 10,000 Charcot feet. You will not find two of them that match each other. So I think that's very, very interesting to think about because that is the definition of patient specific instrumentation.
And that's where, going back to what I had said at the very beginning, this was all about kind of changing the environment of the people around you, trying to change their trajectory in life. And people who have Charcot, their trajectory is just terrible, and
Mhm.
I really felt like Redpoint and the PSI technology had the ability to make a big dent in that world. And I still have confidence that eventually it will get there. So I definitely think it has a role
Yeah.
to play, yet to be determined, in Charcot.
You don't know what you have till it's gone.
Tell me about it. And so, when a company that was your baby gets acquired, you have to be willing to let go of your baby, and you don't really have say in where it's going to go. So you just hope that the people that are taking it over are going to take as good care of it as you did and be passionate about it. And I know Teresa is very committed to making that technology work really well with complex deformities like metaductus. And I think that it is going to potentially play a big role there. And that's due to kind of roll out over this next, 6 months or so.
Depends on how many zeros they give me. If there's enough zeros, then it's yours. You have it. I'll be on
Yeah.
my I'll be on my yacht.
Yeah. So, it's funny because
Mhm.
somebody said, "Hey, it's because I was basically CEO of that company." And so they said, "Hey, strap your boots on. This is going to be a ride, like a bumpy ride." And I didn't
Mhm.
really understand what that meant, but man, there's a going through an acquisition and M&A process. It's merger and acquisition processes. It's tiring.
Yeah.
And, so it really kinda drained me, in ways I didn't think I would be drained.
Sure.
And of course, I was still trying to have a full-time practice and still be a great dad, and, it's a lot of things to juggle, but, um, it was a great experience. There were some really high highs, and there were some difficult decisions to make, um, but in the end it afforded me the freedom to be able, like I said, I stepped back from practice, about 9 months ago to kind of refocus, and
Mhm.
I also owed it to my family after taking 2 years of just being completely present but not present
Yeah.
to, reinvest back in the family, and now I am back kind of into the innovative process again and getting excited, and I'm gonna be heading back to practice here in a little bit, part-time with, one of my former fellows, which I'm excited about.
So let's say that someone has a design idea. Someone out there listening says, "I have an idea, but I don't know what to do with it." Let's walk them through a process of step 1 and then the subsequent steps with that.
Well, it just so happens that I have a lecture that, my fellow and I did a couple years ago, and we titled it "The Iron Chef Surgeon," because it kinda we're trying to figure out what differentiates an innovative surgeon. Um, and I told you I'm kind of a big picture person. So you think about, so every night, before we go to bed, my wife always just puts on kind of like mindless TVs, and she watches like a lot of the cooking shows and bake offs. And anyhow, we end up watching Iron Chef quite a bit.
Mhm.
And I started to see that there's two patterns of chefs that tend to win. So but anyhow, that whole process started me thinking about how this is like surgeons in our field. So when you come out of residency, you're this cookbook king. You've learned all your attendings recipes. You saw how they do their bunions. You saw how they approach their ankle fractures. You saw how they treat their plantar fasciitis patients. So that's the cookbook method of podiatry, right? You're trained really well, you know other people's recipes. So you can get really, really good at something if you do it over and over and over again. So there are some surgeons that are more masters of ingredients. So residency was about learning how to cook out of a cookbook. Fellowship is learning to become a master of ingredients. If you know how ingredients work together, you can start to think outside the box. And so when you are an innovator, you have to be able to take the established concepts, challenge them, and then maybe push them. And so I think the very first thing you need to do is find out who you are. Like, so what I mean by that is, are you an early adopter? Like, are you going around podiatry conferences or, surgical meetings and trying to find out all the new technologies? No, this person just released this. I want to go check that out. Or are you listening in lectures and you're trying to go evidence based, and then you could care less about the vendor hall because you're really just going to do what you're comfortable with? So as
Mhm.
long as you know where you are, and you also have to look at industry as sometimes they don't have your best interest in mind. And we, you see the show Shark Tank, people go present their ideas, and um, we think we're hopping the hot tub with a bunch of friends, and we don't realize that underneath the water surface there's a lot of sharks.
Mhm.
So, and industry knows that surgeons love. to get told that they are great. And I mean, whether it's your patient telling you that, maybe a
Doesn't
rough day,
everyone love being told they're great?
100%. But industry knows this, so they make every surgeon feel like they're number one, and
Yeah,
that's a great concept. And but in reality, you have to understand why you want to get into innovation if you're going to pursue it. This is the question that you had. I have an idea. What I do next? Well, first you have to know who you are, like know what you're trying to get out of it. You have to have some idea of how to protect it. You have to understand what the regulation is behind it, meaning what's the FDA impact? How can I get this through the FDA? How expensive is it going to be?
yeah.
What's the feasibility of bringing this to market? Like, if I get it to market, are people actually going to buy it? Is there going to be a company that's going to promote it?
And that one's
Eh,
tough because everyone loves their own idea, but you have to have an idea that in the eyes of others is actually feasible.
Yes. And the best thing that could ever happen to you as an innovator is somebody tells you that your baby's ugly. Because if yeah, fail fast and fail early.
Yeah.
Don't do what I did with the ankle and drag it out over 15 years and a lot of money. I would have rather somebody said, "Hey, this is great, but move on to your next idea because this is going to represent a lot of heartache and a lot of money." And the chances of you getting it to market's not impossible, but
Yeah.
it's very low. Meanwhile, around the same time I had my ankle implant idea, my co-resident, uh, Kyle Kinman, he had an idea for a little staple device that was like a mix between a staple and a plate. And within like 2 years, he got that up and running and then sold it for a pretty significant amount of money. And I'm like, he had such an easy idea, and
Hmm.
mine was like so complex.
Yeah.
And he got his out really fast, and I'm still sitting on the ankle implant. So anyhow, you gotta know yourself. And there's also three types of innovators. There's I have an idea, but I really don't know what to do with it. So I'd rather hand it to someone else and let them figure out what to do with it. I just want a little credit.
Hmm.
That's fine because we're all really busy, and that's the least frustrating path, and potentially the one that you have the least amount of control over. But if it makes it to market, you'll be happy. And if it doesn't, you don't lose anything. You don't lose sleep over it. Or you have an idea and you can't do it alone. So you find other people that are like minded to help you do it. It might be a small company at the vendor hall that doesn't have the solution and you have an idea and they're willing to work with you on it. So you team up with them. Or you have an idea that you're willing to just say, you know what, I'm going to just take it from here. You are a little bit of a pawn in industry. And as long as you understand that, you kind of have an idea of how to approach industry. And it's sometimes you got to keep your cards close to your vest. So you can't just be one to spill every idea out. There's things that can help you protect. And that's what we'll talk about next. So you have these strategies. So you have IP, you have this thing called confidentiality, you have an NDA, which a lot of people don't understand what that is. And then, what is an FTO? Do you know what an FTO is?
No.
So FTO is called freedom to operate. And freedom to operate becomes important when you have it. So understanding what the concept is, well, freedom to operate, what it's going to do is you're going to look at all the patents that are out there, and it's going to tell you if your idea has any red flags that come up over other people's filings. Because you could have the best idea in the world, but if somebody had that same exact thought process and just happened to file their provisional patent the day before you filed yours, and
Hmm.
it will take you 18 months to even see that they filed that because there's a dark period when you file your provisional, it does not become publicly uh, it doesn't become published until 18 months later. So there's an 18-month dark window where you really you're working on your idea, but you don't know if somebody else might have had an idea around the same time. So you have to wait that 18 months. And after 18 months, you do this freedom to operate. Freedom to operate is going to identify any language out there in other people's IP that might shoot a hole in your IP.
Hmm.
And the worst thing you can do if you come out with a bunch of red flags is to take your idea any further because now any company that touches your idea could be sued by another company with or cease and desist or whatever.
Hmm.
It becomes a big liability for them. So if you have a clean freedom to operate now all of a sudden you have your IP, so your idea is protected, and it's been proven against other people's IP. Now you have an idea that actually has a lot more value than just a napkin sketch. So what not to do? So number one, don't go to conferences and start telling everybody about your concept. Like
Mhm.
you're out drinking with your friends, you haven't seen them in a while, and you're like, dude, I'm working on this really cool thing. They're friends, but they might tell somebody else. And as soon as it becomes part of public domain, it's no longer patentable.
Mhm.
So don't share it. Um, if you have somebody that you trust, ask them to sign an NDA. And, the question is, do you need to file IP? If you want to protect an idea, you really do need to file IP. And that's what we talked about very early on, the importance of finding the right person to help you with that, and that you can communicate your concept to, and they can take that communication and turn it into something that's not just going to protect your idea in its current status, but also prevent other people from later on maybe reverse patenting or reverse engineering your idea.
Mhm.
So you have your provisional, which is the fastest way to get something started. If you have that provisional, you can always add further detail to it within that year. You get your NDA in place and you go and talk to 5 or 6 companies, and you find out that 2 of them are actually quite interested. Well, now it makes sense to put money into it because you have market interest. Your idea is now being somewhat validated in the market,
Mhm.
and it's worth investing in. Or you might get feedback like nobody's interested, and then the question is, well, if the companies that I thought would be interested have no interest, do I really want to sink money into it? And then it becomes sunk cost if you do that.
Yeah.
Then you have the design or utility patent. Those are basically more full patents, and it depends on if you're trying to do a project like a implant or a technique. And then finally you have your foreign patents. So once you get your patent filed in the US, you get a docking number, and then eventually you want to file for the PCT, and you definitely want an attorney to coach you through that. Um, so the other thing that you can do, especially with AI now, I mean, AI makes this so much easier. If I had AI during half my projects, my life would have been so much easier because I would not have wasted a lot of time.
Mhm.
But if you have a concept, do some research. Say, I want to know how many hammer toes are done a year. Ask AI that. How many CPT codes for hammer toe correction are logged every year by Medicare? You used to have to pay companies thousands of dollars to do that marketing research. Now AI does it for free.
Hmm.
So this is a huge game changer in favor of the innovator
Yeah.
because you can do really fast research. So you can start to pare it down, and then you're basically doing market research, and you're also finding out if there's any prior art. AI can do the search for you. It can help
Mhm.
you comb through thousands of patents, which normally you have to pay somebody a lot of money to do. So
Yeah.
so take advantage of AI, and you can maybe talk to an attorney that can maybe give you some ideas how to prompt it, because the language is different. They're not going to call it a hammer to device. They're going to call it some sort of like apparatus for bone to bone fusion that could be used in a toe.
Mhm.
So if you
Yeah.
search hammer toe patent, you might not find it. You can even ask AI, what are different ways you could describe a hammer toe implant from a patent viewpoint? And then
Mhm.
once you get that language, use that as your prompt to do research.
Sure.
So if you find that your idea, there is some prior art in the area, question is because a lot of people are trying to figure out the same problem that you're figuring out. It's just whether or not your idea is different enough. So is it a new idea or is it a modification of the current one? And even if there's a prior solution, it's okay, because you can still find ways to improve on it. And there's room for that kind of technology improvement. And then if you decide that you think it is novel or there's room for it in the marketplace, even if there's somebody else that has something similar, you got to be aware of what the language of their patent is so that you don't violate that. Um, that's where you go ahead and file. And then that's the main IP.
Mhm.
So just having somebody that can weigh in on the regulatory impact of that idea, because that's going to affect whether or not a company is going to look at your concept or not. If it's really expensive for them to bring it to market, they might say we're going to pass. If it's unless it's really, really different and innovative,
Yeah.
or they might look at something that's a quicker pathway.
I've had
So
meetings with companies before, and they tell me how expensive it is, and they tell me it takes 2 to 3 years to even get something to market, and it's just so many hurdles and so much money from their standpoint. I think it's easy as a design idea haver to just think, well, you have all the money, go ahead and spend all your money on my idea, but you have to think of it from their point of view as well.
yeah, because they're going to measure it on whether or not they should invest money. Is it a growing market? Is it something that they have when they sit down with their strategic meetings? Are they saying, "Hey, we've really ignored the hammer toe, and we really need to have a hammer toe device, and we're willing to just get one to compete with other ones, or we want the best one, and we want to, you know." So it depends on that company's style and kind of where they're at.
Mhm,
Um, so actually, the guy on the C arm is John Constantino, who was my fellow at the time.
mhm,
So you have a novice surgeon who's performing the technique, then you have a moderate surgeon, then you have an advanced surgeon. So our advanced surgeon was Sam Adams, who's, you know, kind of an expert in 3D printing, and then we had somebody who was more mid-level. So they all perform the same procedures on different cadavers, and then you just show that you're getting the same regardless of who's doing it. And then the feasibility is more deciding whether or not the idea is gonna make it in the marketplace. And, you know, if you get the idea to work, are people gonna actually buy it?
yeah. Will
And
your idea actually make that company or you, will it make money?
right, that bottom line it that the world evolves around money. Even if you have the right intentions, other people are gonna look at it as, "Can I make money on this?"
Right.
And then this is one of my favorite quotes, and this is kind of what you and I said earlier. You know, you love your idea, but the question is will other people? And
Mhm,
you have to be able to look at your idea critically, like, okay, there are a lot of barriers here. Like, yeah, if I were buying it, I don't think I'd buy this one because, you know, with my ankle, nobody wants to do a class 3 design because that the last one that did
yeah,
it spent $40 million. So
right,
and it takes you just as much time and energy to develop a wrong idea as it does a right one. So the idea is if as soon as you identify it's the wrong one, just abandon it. You know, that's the take home message for innovation is don't waste time on an idea that's going nowhere. Just let it go. You know, be sad about it for a few days or a few weeks, and then
mhm,
start thinking about another problem that you can solve. Because if you came up with an idea to begin with, that means you're innovative. Failure is inevitable. I mean, I can tell you way more failures I've had until Red Point happened,
mhm,
and it was a huge list of them, including really downtimes where I really felt like I pretty much pissed away my whole family's life savings over an ankle implant that went nowhere. But I kept at it, and um, I finally found something that was going to make a difference and was different. And I took the right steps, thankfully, and had the right. The other important thing is have the right people around you.
mhm,
There's three types of people out there. There's ones that it's funny. I had this conversation today about another project I'm on, and the guy said that there's mice, there's eagles, and then there's stars. So mice have the perspective of they're the lowest to the ground. They can see every little nook and cranny, and their biggest worry is about where their next meal is or where the next threat is. So they're literally just living in the moment. They can't plan ahead. It's just second to second. You know,
mhm,
1 second their life can change. So that's most of us. Then you have eagles, and eagles aren't on the ground, so they can't see everything, but they do see a different perspective, so they can see a bigger picture. Um, But, you know, the eagle, they can see things sometimes before they happen. They can tell that, you know, this rainstorm's coming because they can see it on the horizon. That's gonna affect the mouse, but the mouse can't see it because 'cause they're not up in the air.
mhm,
But they can be also on the ground, right? They can fly high, and they can come down, and they can sit on the ground and do things on the ground. Then you have the stars that are looking at the Earth. They're way out in space, like, way out there, and they can't see the mouse. They can't see that sort of perspective. They can maybe get a hint that there's an eagle there, but the stars are what sets the tone for the universe. So, as an innovator, you're one of we all fall into one of those categories. You either get through the daily grind of life and you're just focused on moment to moment, or you're a big dreamer. Big dreamers who are out in the stars have a really hard time executing plans because they can't see the nitty gritty and they're not good at it.
Hmm.
Mice are really good at nitty gritty, but they can't see the big picture. So you really want to be somewhere in the middle, like an eagle. I tend to be pie in the sky as a way out in space in terms of how I think.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really important to realize that that has led me to failures and that I'm not good at certain tasks. But if I have people on my team that are really good at that, the one thing I'm very good at is seeing things before they happen
Hmm.
and thinking outside the box. And I have a creative side of me that a lot of people struggle with. Um, but I also am not a task doer. So if I have somebody that can do that on the team, you just got to balance yourself out. And
Hmm.
that's the same thing with marriage, right? Like there's always somebody who's good at finances. There's always somebody who is really good with the kids when they have something emotional going on.
Hmm.
There's somebody who's a good disciplinarian. Everybody does something a little bit different and to divide and conquer.
So you're saying if people have an idea, they need to call you. Is that what you're saying?
Um, just have a mentor. Have somebody that can you can talk to openly. I mean, I'm here if anybody wants to. I'm happy to coach them through it, but ultimately, in general, just having a mentor. You have a tough case, or you have a patient that had a bad outcome, and you really want to talk to someone. It's nice to be able to call someone and say, "Hey, can I tell you about this case I'm involved in? Like, I'm
Yeah.
really struggling with this, or I don't know what to do."
Hmm.
Having a mentor in our profession is huge. Whether it's your residency director or somebody you met at a meeting, um, life becomes better when you have people that you can either commiserate your misery with or uh, share where you're at. Maybe they give you an outside the box way of thinking that you weren't thinking because you're the mouse on the ground, right? You can't see
Hmm.
the big picture. Somebody who's not involved in your practice can help you see that bigger picture. And I've had mentors through the years that have helped me in that way. And I that would be in the innovation lecture. That's what the take home message is: have a mentor that can help you. Um, and feel free to ask people because most of the people in our profession are really giving, and they're you people see at lectures, people who are out there doing things um, that is in an area that you're interested in. Go talk to them.
Hmm.
Pick their brain, and sometimes you'll find that some of them are really open to mentoring, and some of them really aren't into that, and that's okay
Yeah.
too.
I think this has been a wealth of knowledge for people. I really appreciate you kind of opening up, giving us a peek behind the curtain of your journey, and letting the people see what goes into the complicated side of product design, development, implementation, the failures, the successes. I'm happy for you that you've had the success that you have. So you've earned it and you deserve it. So hats off to you for all of your hard work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's it's like when the NBA players and stuff they win a championship. The one thing they always do is they thank everybody around them, and I can only say that I'm where I'm at because I've had amazing people in my life. Wife, coworkers, fellows. I mean, the fellows have I learned just as much from my fellows that, hopefully they've learned from me. And,
Hmm.
I've had my highs and my lows, and the camaraderie is what gets you through those moments. So I'm only successful because I've been able to identify that it takes a team to do that.
Absolutely. If people want more information about you or in Modus, where would you direct them?
So InModus actually has a website, inmodusmedical.com. Um, or I have my own personal website. It's just adamperler.com. And you'll see that my practice is currently it shows on my website that I've stepped back, but I'm going to be activating again here and shortly. But people can reach out at any time. I think I get emails through the website. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can shoot me. That's probably the easiest way is LinkedIn or Instagram. Although if you're on Instagram, you're going to see that I'm a big Star Wars nerd, so we could geek out about that
More than they ever wanted to know.
more than they ever wanted to know. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with me tonight. You and I have discussed previously that we're going to have you on again in the future because we're just cracking the surface of everything that's inside that brain of yours.
And we got some good stuff to hopefully talk about. Maybe a little bit more exciting than this, because maybe this isn't for everyone, but
Yeah,
next time we'll keep it a little bit more real.
absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on tonight.
Yeah, yeah. Have an awesome night, and thanks for inviting me. I appreciate you sticking with me because it took me a while to agree to come on. Not agree.
Absolutely.
It was just a matter of finding the energy and time.
We made it happen.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this episode of Pod Patrol, joined by Dr. Adam Perler. You're your host, Dr. Jeff Dikis. We'll see you guys next time.
Have a great night.
Disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not represent any employer or entity. The information shared is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or used in any legal capacity, including establishing standards of care. All efforts have been made to comply with HIPAA regulations. No guarantees are made regarding the accuracy of statements or opinions provided. Interaction with the podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please enjoy this podcast responsibly.